Hey, Daily Dosers, this is Pastor Larry here, and we've been taking a look at how do we balance responsibility and rest. And today I want to take a look at this thing called rest through the lens of something the Bible calls a Sabbath. Now, the idea of a Sabbath begins right at the creation, where God created for 6 days and then rested for a seventh. And then the law of Moses was given, and one of the 613 laws was on a Sabbath they were not to work. Now, that law also had a statement that it was to be a law forever and ever. So every now and then, modern-day Christians will think, well, it says here that that law never ends. What we need to remember is when Jesus said, it is finished, it is paid in full, all of the laws were fulfilled. Even the Holy of Holies was now accessible to anyone, not just a high priest one day a year for the Day of Atonement. And so what that means is we are no longer under the Sabbath law. And in fact, in Romans chapter 14 and 15, the Apostle Paul addresses an argument that was going on in the early church. Hey, do we need to keep all of these Sabbaths or not? And he says, you can choose in that area. But here's what is eternal: the need for rest. You know, we've done a weird thing with the biblical Sabbath. We've turned it into a day of focusing on God, and that's not what it was originally. What it was originally was like God was our union steward saying, you get one day off a week, even during planting and harvest season when everybody else is killing themselves. And in the Old Testament, there's even a promise that if you take that day off, I'm going to make sure your harvest is still as good or better than everybody else's. So the principle God is giving us is a principle of rest. And it is a principle that we must follow, or we are going to do this thing we call burnout. And God knows that and knew that from the very beginning. You know, the reason they were not allowed to cook and do all this stuff was not you have to have this quiet day. Back then, everything was homegrown, slaughtered. It was made from scratch. So the whole idea of preparing a meal and doing that work was so difficult. He said, no, do double the day before and take this day off. Now, let me fast forward. I'm going to give you a description, not a prescription, but how it's worked in my life. I have never found myself profiting from a regularly scheduled one day a week off where I just, don't do anything or try to not work, if you will, rest and enjoy the good things of life. That's just not how I'm wired, and I bet that's not how some of you are wired. Then I have some friends. It works incredibly well for them to get that on the schedule and then find themselves so refreshed. For me, it was simply making sure I had margin built into my schedule. Because if you do not build margin into your schedule, you will never have margin. You've got to put something there on your calendar so that you can say, sorry, I'm booked. People don't have to know why you're booked. So whether it's your job, they're going to fill in with something there, or it's your kid's sports program, or whatever it would be, we have this tendency to take a look at our calendar, and if there's an empty space and there's something important, it gets in there. And what we don't realize is this incredible thing called rest has been completely ignored because of what people have called, and I like the phrase, the tyranny of the urgent. And it causes us to ignore the importance. What I want to ask each and every one of you listening to this today is if you come to Jesus where he says, if you were weary and heavy laden, come to me and I will give you rest. He's given you rest. He's even given you a plan to get that rest, whether it's one day or parts of a day or whatever. So the question is, if you're not getting rest, why not? And I would suggest it might be because you haven't realized how important it is. And like God scheduled it in the Old Testament every 7 days, they were booked. You and I need to book it. So when we have that temptation for one more thing that never allows us to refresh and find ourselves, we're able to go, sorry, it's booked.